And welcome back to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We're here for more news, content, tech, and wisdom from the world of marketing. As always, I am joined by my co-host, man on a mission to keep marketing simple. Not only is he the voice of the Marketing and Fanning Podcast and the host of the Roger Vlog video series, he is also the author of Cats, Mats, and Marketing Plans. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And my co-host is also a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast, putting out over 40 pieces of content in 4 weeks recently. Wow, that is a massive achievement. I give you Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to you, viewers and listeners, for your ongoing support. Roger, this is episode 23.
Yes.
It so happens to be also the last recording of 2020.
It's, well, almost, we're nearly done 6 months worth of episodes, and each episode is about an hour or so long. So it's an amazing amount of content that we've put out, and I've enjoyed absolutely every single minute of it.
Oh, likewise. And I hope you don't mind, but I've done some numbers just because it's always good to look back. I know that episode 20 was a very good and interesting milestone for you and I, but this is essentially the end of the year. We'll be back early 2021. So if you think about the 6 segments that, we used to organize the recording, and of course the key items within the segments, I can let you know that in the news and this week in history, we have shared 184 items of content.
Fantastic.
When it comes to content spotlight, the articles, videos, and so on that we review, we have reviewed, you and I, 46 items of content. For the content shout-outs, we have spoken about more than 50 individuals. We've reviewed more than 42 texts and apps, and we have given, obviously our views and reactions about 23 films in film marketing.
Fantastic. I love the fact that 42 tech and apps, that's a real Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference there. You couldn't have planned that better if you tried, Pascal.
So thanks again, Roger, for making this year a bit more exciting and interesting than would have been otherwise. And once again, if I may reiterate our thanks to our viewers and listeners for your support. We appreciate all the thank yous and well dones that we get on the socials. But let's begin, as we've done so far, with In the News.
UK online sales increased by 23% this Black Friday when compared to 2019, although there was a 4% decline in average order value, likely due to heavier discounting.
Well, both of Coca-Cola's heartwarming Christmas adverts have been voting the best of 2020, with The Holidays Are Coming taking first place, followed by their new advert entitled The Letter.
The UK's first all-electric car charging station opened near Braintree in Essex. This is an important milestone towards the ban of combustion engine vehicles by 2030.
Well, Roger, after a 70-year run, IKEA will be stopping the publication of its printed catalogue. At its peak in 2016, IKEA said that they distributed 200 million copies in 32 languages.
My goodness. And if you live in the US, Christmas has gotten even more exciting with 21 James Bond movies streaming for free on YouTube Movies until the end of December.
And according to the CIM and Hayes Recruitment, marketers enjoy working remotely, and 55% will request to continue to do so, even though they can return to the office.
And KFC has produced a mini-movie in partnership with Lifetime TV channel entitled A Recipe for Seduction. The 15-minute film tells the story of a young heiress falling for a handsome young chef with a secret fried chicken recipe and a dream.
And finally, Babybel Cheese has launched baby onesies made to look like the brand's packaging, and for each onesie purchased, Babybel will donate to children living in poverty. And I have no idea how I managed to read that without bursting into laughter, Roger.
Mini Babybel.
Can you imagine your baby looking like a Babybel cheese? I mean, I know that it's Christmassy with the red and the white, but, well, it is content marketing after all.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, okay. You want to dress your kids up maybe in a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer costume, but not a Babybel the Red packaging costume, do you, really?
Well, I think it's very funny. And if people do go ahead, I'm sure we're going to see the pictures on social media. Now, Roger, what is interesting about in the news, which are compiled, we alternate obviously the weeks for the compilation of the show notes. Last week, if I'm not mistaken, you read the news item about the marketing of electric cars. And it so happens that today you've been reading the announcement about the first all-electric car charging station.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I did say last year was, is there a cat in hell's chance of the infrastructure being in place within 10 years to enact what the government have said, i.e. to ban combustion engines? Well, maybe this is just a big one step on the way there. There's something a bit weird about it being in Braintree in Essex, though. That rings a bell for some reason, and I can't think why. Probably something to do with a TV programme or something like that.
Yeah, but let's ask our viewers and listeners. Perhaps there is a link there, maybe with technology or indeed entertainment. Can I ask your reaction about the fact that Coca-Cola voted again, their Christmas adverts voted best of 2020? The Holidays Are Coming is actually an old advert, first released in 1995. Is there a lesson in there that if something is working, why change it?
Is it actually total re-release or is it a remake?
I think it's slightly been improved upon, but it's the same scenes completely.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because, I mean, on the face of it, I've not watched all of the Christmas adverts this year, and I was sort of hoping that the companies might try to do something a little bit different because, do we really just want the same old syrupy, sort of sad, lonely person that John Lewis does or something, or Monster Under the Bed or whatever it is. And I have to say, some of the attempts this year have been pretty dire. And in fact, there's a couple of them, and I won't name them just to spare the brands their embarrassment, but I've actually stopped watching before the end. But I do like the Coca-Cola ones, and they do stand out. And the one you mentioned, I've seen a lot of people raving about that, but I didn't know until you just told me there that it was effectively a remastering or a remix of old content, which again, it just goes to show how often do you find, especially at this time of year, songs from the 70s and 80s effectively get re-released. Maybe they tweak the sound a little bit to make it sound a little bit more modern, but effectively it's the same content that was produced 20, 30 years ago.
And of course, historically, Coca-Cola is pretty much, responsible for creating the image of Father Christmas as we know him today. That kind of red and white outfit and so on because of their branding. But talking about reading news, I recall many months ago reading the news about the Argos catalogue essentially being no longer printed. I don't know if you know, but they're actually using that as a bit of a hook. So if you watch TV adverts about Argos, they are presenting the last book of dreams as the items. And then today I found myself reading about IKEA, 70 years. The very first one, obviously, that was created by the MD of IKEA at the time.
Goodness, I can't stop to think how many trees have been involved in creating untold billions of printed copies of their catalogue. My goodness, it beggars belief.
So I was thinking about potentially going, out to IKEA and even Argos and get a handful of copies of the very last one, and almost, reenact the scene from Back to the Future 2, where in 10 years' time those catalogues would be worth a lot of money. What do you think?
Oh well, we could actually put them in a box, couldn't we, Pascal? In a steel box and bury them somewhere, and put a marker. And yeah, we can go back there in 10 years and dig them up and see what we think.
But I still feel sorry for children, in future. How are they going to make their Christmas list without cutting out, pictures from the Argos catalogue?
They'll just have to copy and paste them off their screens, I guess. I'm actually quite interested in this KFC recipe for seduction. It sounds incredibly cheesy and incredibly naff. But I do have an irresistible urge to actually go and find it and watch it, probably just to see how ultimately quite cheesy it is actually going to be. Have you seen that?
I've not seen it. I'm aware of other brands and other kind of food and drink brands doing mini movies. I think the most famous one has been the Estrella beer. And usually the execution production is pretty stunning, but it's a weird one because you watch a story with famous actors, but then there's the product is everywhere.
Yeah,
and it's really quite an interesting one. But yes, the young chef with a secret fried chicken recipe and a dream.
Incredible.
Right, thanks very much, Roger, for talking about the news. But let's move on, if you don't mind, to our very last content spotlight session of 2020. And this is the Content Spotlight segment where Roger and I surprise each other with an article, a video, or a podcast that makes us reflect on the wonders of marketing. So, Roger, what do you have for us this week?
Pascal, I'm going to cheat a little bit this week because, in fairness, this is more like an extended item of news, if truth be told. But I have found a couple of articles which talk about it in depth, and therefore I'm claiming the right to call it a content spotlight. Now, I'm not sure whether this is a marketing gag or whether it is some artist trying something on, or whether we are genuinely being trolled by aliens. But I don't know whether you've seen the reports of this recently, but there have been mysterious monoliths appearing in various locations around the world. And the first one appeared early in December in Utah, and it was a straight-up column of stainless steel buried into the ground, evoking the image that you might remember from long ago in that film 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
I think the monolith in that film was black, but apart from that, similar sort of location in the desert. And I think the story in 2001: A Space Odyssey was that these monoliths have somehow sort of influenced the development of mankind from when they were apes until they grew and developed technology and eventually went off into space. So what I actually quite like about when this sort of thing happens is that on the one hand, there are the people who, probably like me, who immediately think, oh, this is some sort of gimmick, some sort of company is trying to play on people's imagination or conspiracy theories or whatever it is, and it'll be a product push for something. Then, of course, there are the people who think it's going to be an artist who's trying to sell an exhibition or something like that. And then, of course, there will be the genuine conspiracy theorists who think it is a genuine alien monolith and something we've really got to be worried about. Now, over the next few days, more of these monoliths started turning up all over the world. There was one in Romania found. There was also one in California. I think that they were probably copycat monoliths, if you can actually say that, copycat monolith, and somebody was just jumping onto the bandwagon. Whether it was a coordinated effort across the globe, I don't know. And it would appear that workmen, have been seen dismantling the one in Utah. But I don't know what it is. Nobody seems to know whether it's a marketing gimmick or it's an artist or what it is. But it's obviously created almost like a viral buzz around the world. And I guess the reason I chose this, Pascal, was because we do live in this world at the moment where people are in love with conspiracy theories. Do you know, the COVID virus has to be some sort of plot involving Bill Gates and multi-billionaires to inject us all with nanobots so they can control our minds. It can't possibly be as simple as something of a virus starting in a wet market in a different country that spreads around the world naturally. And therefore, the most obvious answer to this is somebody is playing a prank. But you still get people who will try to spin it up into some sort of global alien invasion story. And I think that this one story in itself just highlights the many different reactions that human beings can have to quite simple stories, whether it is a marketing gimmick or whether it genuinely is some sort of scientific breakthrough. And I think we should all just reflect upon that, whether we believe that COVID was a natural thing or whether we believe it's some global conspiracy. It's just to sit back and actually think, do you know what? Is the simplest answer actually the one we should believe?
Yeah, thanks very much. And what a wonderful take on what essentially was, yeah, you're right, incredible kind of headline grabber and attention grabbing items. I wasn't aware of the others around the world. I was only aware of the one in the US. And for me, what was very telling is how visually striking the, I suppose, the monument or the monolith was. And I think there was something about the aesthetic as well, and the way in which the light was bouncing off, the metallic surface and so on, that caught people's imagination. I wonder if it'd been the same if it'd been simply a rock or wood or other form of other materials. I think the way it had that silvery finish, didn't it? And it was very, very bright in the sunlight in that part of the world. And you're right. I mean, he's gone. It's been mentioned on radio, TV, on the internet, and I don't know. I mean, if it's an artist or if it's a brand, how long do you think before they reveal themselves?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's something they could, if it is genuine, and I think that the bookie's favourite is that it's an artist as opposed to a marketing campaign. But maybe it'll turn up in a few other places before whoever it is, Banksy or something, actually declares his hand and says, "You've got me, Gov. It was me all along."
And do you think that the fact that it was in a remote location played as well to people's imagination?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned 2001: A Space Odyssey. The location of the first one, the one in Utah, does suspiciously look to me like the film set of the scene in 2001 with the apes towards the beginning, set in prehistory. So I think that they were riffing off that visual from that particular film. So I think that's possibly why it feels so striking, is because it is actually very familiar to anybody who's seen that film.
Excellent. Right, Roger. Let me share with you my selection for today.
Of course.
A video from a channel and a group of artists, filmmakers called Film Riot. So not only do I want to share this particular episode of Film Riot, but I also want to spend some time to thank Ryan Connolly and his team for many years of entertainment, but also inspiration. So Film Riot is a YouTube channel. They also provide training. They also have swap files and news and tech about being a no-budget filmmaker. And at the heart of it, when we talk about content marketing and video marketing, my stance on this idea of emulating the behavior of independent filmmakers and using those habits and techniques and mindset to improve vastly how engaging your content will be. So the title of this particular video is called The 4 L's, as in letter L, the 4 L's of no budget filmmaking. And it's really looking at this idea of what can you produce and how can you achieve something which has high production value when time and money is against you. The way in which it's been created is actually a behind the scenes look at a short film created by one of their visiting filmmakers and lecturers. So the 4 L's are as follows. I'm going to give you a quick overview, but the other reason as well I chose it is because I was thinking of you, Roger. Because some of the stories I'm going to share in a moment you can relate to. So the first L is lighting. The second are lenses. Then comes limitations, then locations. These will be the 4 L's that you have to wrestle with as a no-budget video maker or filmmaker. So when we talk about lighting in the context of this short film and the kind of making of behind the scenes, they are saying that it's obviously, the first thing people do is to use natural light. And they are inviting us to consider using different times of the days to see about the impact on the image and whether or not you may discover that where you live and different part of the world, light obviously behave differently. You might find that different times of the day gives you different colors and different kind of images to consider. You and I know, and many of our listeners' viewers will know about sunrise and sunset, but they may be a different part. And of course, where we live, we have, as they say, real seasons. So you may have to also use different times of the day, depending on time of the year. But the other advice they are giving, again, for that impact and that storytelling, consider using fire and flames from candles all the way to bonfire to, again, can create something very different. And then finally, use LED lights in different shapes and forms, from balls to lines to triangles to squares, and look at ways to do things very differently. So the first L is lighting. So I'll just pause for now and get your reaction, Roger, you, the host of the Roger Log video series.
Yeah, well, I was just taking some imaginary notes there. I mean, yeah, lighting is one of those really interesting things. I do struggle with inside lighting. I never feel satisfied with inside lighting. There's recently I found, I go down to my favourite harbour for a coffee frequently, and there's been a couple of times recently where I've gone down around about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I guess it's what you would call golden hour, because the sun hasn't quite set yet. It's probably got within an hour to half an hour to go to setting, and yet the colour of the sun on your skin and on the trees and the buildings around you has a really sort of golden glow, and it's just incredible. And there's been a few times where I thought, I've really sort of smacked myself and said, you should have brought your camera down today. Even if you didn't have a story to tell, it's just the fact the colours are absolutely beautiful. And yeah, lighting is interesting, and I'm going to shut up there, because one of my bits of marketing tech coming up is about lighting as well. So I'm not going to blow that.
So we spoke about lighting. So the message really for all of us: be a bit more adventurous and try different things. You could be pleasantly surprised. So of course, we're talking about lighting. Let's talk about lenses. The message as part of this, the 4 L's of no budget filmmaking, is to actually really, really know your camera, whether it's a mobile phone, by the way, or a camera, but know the camera. Try different lenses where possible. Trying to achieve, that blurred background effect, which I think helps the viewer understand what you want to tell as a story, and also be familiar with the auto and manual focus. So essentially, do your homework, try different things, be disappointed by the result until you eventually find your own language as a videographer. Let's move on to limitations. This is really at the heart of independent filmmaking. You will never have everything you need or want to share that story. You know this too well, Roger. So to begin with, make sure that you film for the edit, because time will be against you. So editing is part of it, but also film for your own editing skills. So don't imagine something that you can't do or that your team cannot do. Know your kit inside out and know the limitations, including battery life. Talking from experience, of course. And finally, know about sound, but importantly, sound distractions. So if you're going to be somewhere where sound is going to be obviously bad for you, there'll be noise, there'll be people laughing, door slamming and so on, then film with a view of the sound not being part of the story. And actually, in the example that they use in a sci-fi short story, they didn't actually film with the sound at the time. The sound was added later on in post-production because it was much swifter. And interestingly for you, Roger, the filmmaker they choose as a guest for the making of was using epidemic sound, which I know you're using as well.
Yeah, I do like sound, and quite often with my vlogs, what I might do is, again, if I go down to the aforementioned harbour, I have got some, from Epidemic Sound, some backtracks of harbour sounds. And sometimes if you actually overlaid that over the actual sound you're getting, or even dial down some of the harsher sounds that you're getting in the actual environment, it softens the whole thing and makes it sound a lot more engaging. And so it's always worth playing around. I think it was you who taught me that. Even if you think you've got the sound that you want, you can often download some other sound to overlay just to make your video sound a little bit more natural.
Yeah, so from limitation, we move on to locations. You know that I'm a big fan of making location almost a character in any stories, whether it's a corporate video all the way to fiction work. So my advice, which is kind of echoed in that video as well, make a list of locations that are available to you. We're very lucky in the UK. We are literally an hour away from the sea or mountains or forest or natural environment. So make a list of natural locations near you. And also make a list of man-made historical locations. And thirdly, a list of modern contemporary man-made locations. And that list really should also be a source of inspiration. With the 4 L's of no budget filmmaking or no budget video marketing: lighting, lenses, limitations, and locations.
Do you know, right up my street, this, Pascal. I'm going to watch this after we've stopped recording this video. And again, I go back to the very first time I ever met you, and you did a presentation about filmmaking, and you said those things there. Look for locations, look for monuments, look for buildings. And that's why I did start to do a lot of my videos outside rather than sat here with my telescope behind me, because let's face it, the telescope gets a bit dull after a while. So there's nothing. It's great when you can go to a different location. The downside of living in Scotland is it's so bloody windy, and half the time I go out trying to film something and I get defeated by the wind.
Absolutely. Well, I remember this because within a week of the presentation, you very kindly sent me a link to your first Rog vlog where you were near that very tall, pointy monument in Edinburgh. What is it called again?
The Scott Monument, yes.
Which you compared to one of the Thunderbirds.
Thunderbird 3.
Absolutely. Great. So once again, this is all about all of us being a bit more ambitious about our content next year. You made a hint a moment ago about tech and apps. So let's move on to marketing tech and apps. And in this segment, Roger and I surprise you, viewers and listeners, with our tech and apps that can make life easier as a content creator. So, Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Well, Pascal, as promised, I'm going to talk to you about lighting. Now, again, we don't collaborate in advance on what we're going to talk about on the show. So the fact that lighting came up in your content spotlight, see what I did there? And I'm going to talk about lighting. Now, I've been after something just to make my home office set just look a little bit more professional. Now, it doesn't look too bad compared to a lot of absolute disasters that there are out there of people on Zoom meetings and things like that. I have got a decent key light shining in my face here, and in the background here you can see there's a bit of a green glow. That is literally just a bedside lamp with a fancy bulb stuck into it that you can change the colour of. I've come across a piece of kit, and it's by Philips, and it is called Hue Lights. Hue Lights. Now, you can get bulb versions, you can get strip versions, you can get triangle versions, just like you mentioned earlier on. But the ones that I've gone for Christmas are a little bit more like they're sort of oblong, rectangular shape and quite sturdy, and can, depending upon which way you turn them, actually spread the light over quite a wide area or actually over quite a narrow area. But these lights are controllable by your phone, and you can set them to different degrees of luminescence and different colours, up to 1.2 million colours, so the marketing blurb would have you believe. Now, I'm getting these for Christmas. I have had a watch of a few of the videos, though, to see how they work, and I'm really quite excited about some of the results that it's going to allow me to mess around with. But one of the most interesting things, and this isn't the reason I bought them, but I found this out after I decided to buy them. But what you can also do is you can plug them into the back of a television set, a big surround sound TV, and the lighting will then mimic. So if you're watching Star Wars, for example, it will use those 1.2 million colours to potentially shine similar colours onto your wall as it's reading off the screen. So obviously, if there's going to be a lot of sort of explosions with a lot of yellow and orange, it will beam a lot of yellow and orange onto your wall. If you're in a dark environment, say with tiny flickering lights, it will mimic that as well. And apparently the sensory effect of this on somebody watching a TV program or a film is remarkable. Now, I think they originally designed it with gamers in mind. So you would effectively put these lights behind your computer screen or your gaming screen, and it would create those lighting effects to enhance your experience with the game. But apparently a lot of people just realised how good it worked with TVs as well. But whether I'll get into that or not, I'm just quite excited with the 1.2 million different colours that I'm going to be able to play with, as opposed to green, blue, red or yellow, which I have with this little bulb that I've got sat behind me. So that's the first thing, Pascal. Second one, now this is leading on from something I talked about last week. Last week I talked about an audio app called Clubhouse, and I did hint at another live streaming app which I was going to talk about this week, and it's called Happs, Happs, the Happs app, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Now, it's live streaming, and you might think, oh, do we need another live stream? And everybody does live streaming. LinkedIn, Facebook, Periscope, they all do live streaming. But the thing with this one is they are encouraging people. Now, and the caveat I'm going to come to is I don't know how far I agree with this. They are encouraging people to use this live streaming app to almost become trainee journalists, news journalists. So, for example, if there was an accident in your town, they would be encouraging you to go along with your app, with your Happs app, and film, as a journalist would do, the footage of that accident. Now, this brings to mind that film in LA where the guy's wandering around with a camera at night looking for accidents and things to film. But obviously, they're also talking about, a new aeroplane being launched, or a new shop opening, or a new coffee shop opening, or anything newsworthy. They're encouraging you to film. Now, what doesn't happen is you don't then just upload it and beam it out from your own account. It is actually apparently quality checked by people at Happs App HQ, and they will then decide whether it's newsworthy enough to put it up onto their actual server. So I guess unlike the other social media where you could basically just go live and film whatever you want, these people are trying to lend it an element of journalistic control. Now, when I did see that, I thought, well, that's actually quite interesting, because it might encourage people, to be a bit inquisitive and to search things out. But then I couldn't help but think about that film about the guy in LA driving around looking for accidents to film at night, and didn't wonder whether this could potentially become something a little bit sinister. So I have to say I'll probably download it and have a mess around with it, but the jury's perhaps out on what I actually think about it and how well it will be policed. But I'd be really interested to hear what you think of it, Pascal, and indeed anybody listening to Two Geeks in a Marketing podcast. Have you tried the Happs app, and what do you think of it?
Well, if back to your point, there's going to be some good editorial guidelines about the content and the storylines and so on and so forth, and it's not going to be essentially voyeurism, I'm intrigued by it. And are they saying literally you could almost have points being awarded for the best content creators, and that leads to you joining the Happs Academy of sort. Do they require, perhaps you don't know, do they require you to present as well, or just film?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure. There is definitely a sort of point system where you can effectively become promoted, I guess. But yeah, I think it would be nice if they actually did promote, if they actually did encourage you to report and to actually describe how you're feeling. There are some clips on the app site where one of the persons filming it has actually been interviewing a person within the crowd at a demonstration in London. So they're definitely encouraging interaction with the environment around you. So yeah, very, very interesting to see how it develops.
Absolutely. I'll definitely look into that. And just to react to your very first item, is that interesting how the world of gaming has really influenced, the marketing as well as home life as well?
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, when I saw this thing, my immediate thought was, it's just lights to go in the back of my studio. But when I realised exactly what it was designed for, it was actually quite mind-blowing, actually. I didn't realise you could do that with gaming.
So I've chosen two items that would make my Christmas list if I could, quickly send a Christmas list. So just a message to Mrs. Fintoni. If you're watching, listening to this episode, pay attention to what's coming next. So there are two items, about one to be released early next year and one that is available now that I don't need, but I really want them, Roger. Is what I mean. So the very first one, really excited about it. It's the famous Zoom PodTrack P4. Now, Zoom, not the video company, but the audio tech company who's been releasing Zoom audio recorders forever, it would seem. And we've been waiting very patiently, all of us in the UK in particular, but the Zoom PodTrack P4 has been called the podcaster's dream engine. So what you can do is something that is no bigger bigger than a large phone, if you will, Roger, you can record up to 4 people in conversation. And they can be XLR as well as normal audio jack. But in addition to that, you can control, therefore, the input volume. You can also plug some headsets. So when we are able to be closer with each other next year, you'll be able to actually stimulate and be the host yourself of a conversation with up to 4 people. And if somebody can't quite make, the get together, you can also link your phone. So you could ring them and link your phone audio to the PodTrack P4 and record, the sound there. But the reason why it's been called the podcaster's dream device or engine, not just because of all the things you can plug in, but Zoom have been using, obviously, their years and years of understanding audio recording to introduce some inbuilt noise reductions and noise limiters. So the raw audio file is claimed to be of such quality that there'll be little audio editing required. The next one, which again I want but I don't need, is the famous Shure Super 55 Deluxe microphone. With a name like this, Roger, what would you want to have the Shure Super 55 Deluxe microphone? Best known as the Elvis Presley microphone. This is the retro, vintage, chrome-looking microphone, which you've seen people actually, usually singers, as well as kind of people on stage. And it just looks so nice. And part of what we do, a lot of us, is our kit is often in view when we do the kind of session and I was thinking that would be such a lovely microphone to have in view, just where it's going to look, the way the light's going to bounce off it. So again, 2 items that I don't need, but I really want them, Roger.
The Shure Super 55 Deluxe microphone is one of the best names for a piece of kit I've heard since the Bambleweenie 57 Submeson Brain, which I think was another quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, it's funny, you and I are exactly the same. There's loads of pieces of tech that I would love to have, in fact I want to have, that I don't need. And certainly lockdown, and especially the proximity of Black Friday to the recording of this podcast, that is a dangerous time of the year for people like us, isn't it? Because we see things on offer for prices which are less than they were, but still ridiculously high, and yet we feel that we are being seduced into buying them because of those reductions. And yeah, you've just got to give yourself a sharp slap to make yourself realise that actually you really don't need it. But I'm wavering over the Zoom PodTrack P4. I saw our good friend Mr. Mark Asquith review this on video on YouTube last week or so. In fact, it may have been you sent me the link to it. And I mean, he gets so enthusiastic about pieces of kit like this, just like you and I do. But I did sit there thinking, that is such a great piece of podcasting kit. But then I couldn't remember the last time where I ever sat down with somebody face to face to record a podcast episode. So I did have to convince myself that you don't really need one that can let you do 4 people at once, especially not at the moment.
Now, I remember at the time I told Mark how jealous I was. He'd received, obviously, an example, because we were still waiting for the official, obviously, release in the UK. So, thanks very much, Roger. Shall we move on for one last time in 2020 for This Week in History?
In 1882, Edward Johnson, an associate of Thomas Edison, designs the first set of electric Christmas lights in history. Prior to this, people would traditionally decorate their trees with wax candles.
Well, in 1895, the world's first movie screening takes place at the Grand Café in Paris, France. The makeshift theatre uses the cinematograph projector created by the Lumiere brothers.
In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright make their famous first flights with a powered aircraft. The most successful was the 4th and final flight, in which Wilbur flew for 59 seconds.
And in 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premieres at the Carthage Circle Theatre in Los Angeles. This was the very first full-length animated feature, taking 3 years and nearly $1.5 million to produce.
My goodness. In 1968, astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell and William Anders became the first men to orbit the moon. On Christmas Eve, the crew made a TV broadcast from Apollo 8, the most watched TV programme ever at the time.
And in 1982, Time magazine awards its Man of the Year award to the personal computer, calling it Mission of the Year, the very first non-human to receive the award since its creation in 1927.
In 1995, the Alta Vista search engine is launched, one of the most popular search engines in the early World Wide Web. Alta Vista was overtaken by Google in 2001 and purchased by Yahoo in 2003.
And finally, in 2009, James Cameron's Avatar is released and becomes the highest grossing film of all times for 10 years until Avengers Endgame overtook it at the box office.
Pascal, did people really put wax candles on Christmas trees?
They did.
To me, that would, I mean, that your fire and health and safety would never allow that these days. I'm surprised that many houses in history didn't burn down purely because of that.
Oh, they did. They did. We used to have in France adverts from the kind of national fire services telling people not to do that. I think it lasted well after the Second World War as a practice. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, there are those old-fashioned Christmas cards often have Christmas trees with candles on them, and you've always thought that's got to be a bit of a joke, hasn't it? But obviously not.
So once again, I'm absolutely blown away by the many firsts, in this week in history. I don't know where to start, but I'm going to go with Alta Vista because, yes, fondly, this was my very first search engine on my very first computer, I think, or certainly the one that I owned that didn't come from work.
I'm finding it hard to think that it was that far back in time. It just seems unlikely.
Yeah, so it was built in the days of HarperNet, and then obviously they moved on to I think 1995 was when people could buy computers more directly. But I had forgotten completely that it'd been bought by Yahoo in 2003 and then disappeared.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I don't think Alta Vista was the first search engine that I came across. I'm pretty sure it was probably Yahoo. That's
Right.
probably the one I remember first.
So I wanted to quickly mention to you once again, you end up reading an item about aviation and an aircraft. Without, obviously, Orville and Wilbur, without the Wright brothers, there would be no aviation industry we know today.
I mean, it was Kitty Hawk Beach, wasn't it? Where they did their famous 59-second flight. And, I mean, again, I know that before that, man had flown in balloons of sorts. And even way back in history, Leonardo da Vinci had drawn a schematic diagram of some sort of early helicopter. But this was the first time man had been into the air on a powered aircraft. And it's almost like tracing back the ancestry of every modern airliner, the 737 MAX, the Boeing 737 MAX, which we talked a lot about last week, the Boeing 747, the Concorde, Cessnas, all of them can trace their heritage back to those two guys messing around on a beach in 2003, in 1903. Absolutely incredible.
No, absolutely. Talking of tracing back ancestry, without Walt Disney's vision for a full-length feature animated film, Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, again, there would be no Avatar.
Absolutely right. And Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is a phenomenal film, isn't it? And, even as an adult, I will marvel at the amount of detail that goes into that film. And to think that they did it by drawing every single frame of film in the entire 90-minute film, or however long it was, it just almost defies belief. I mean, today, obviously, it's all computer generated and they don't have to painstakingly do that. But if you think about all of those scenes which have all the little animals in, all the flowers, all the scenery in the back, the dwarves, Snow White, the witch, all moving at the same time, how they managed to actually draw that. It was just, incredible artistry there. And yeah, a lot of the techniques that were developed by hand and then computerized over the years, I guess meant that we could end up with something like Avatar, which was similarly mind-blowing in terms of computer graphics, I guess.
There's two memories for me with regard to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Well, the first one as a child being terrified by the queen when she turns into the witch. It's really quite a scary scene when you're a young child, because it's so well crafted and arcing back to the Grimm brothers type of fairy tale. But the other one was a documentary about the making of Snow White, where you saw Walt Disney really acting as a leader, as a visionary, where how he actually explained and introduced the concept to his team and to his kind of employees, and for them to kind of buy into it. And so on. I know that a latter part of his life, there's grumbles about his style of leadership and so on and so forth. But for that very first instance, it's a lesson again about how you can share a vision, how you can get people behind it to make it a reality.
Absolutely right. No, it's a humbling film to watch, as long as you don't just think, oh, it's just a kid's cartoon. You've got to know the history of it in order to understand the enormity of what you're watching.
Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure to look at This Week in History one last time in your company in 2020. Of course, we will come back to it in 2021. But on the subject of content creators and content creation, let's move on to the content creators shout-outs.
Let's do it.
And in this segment, Roger and I celebrate the work of content creators bringing value to their community. So, Roger, who is in the spotlight today?
In my spotlight this week, two people who live down in Lancashire. Funnily enough, they live just a little bit along the road from Blackpool, which is where I grew up. Martin Huntback and Lindsay Cambridge of Jammy Digital. Now, I've known these two for ages, and they run a very successful company. It's called Jammy Digital, as I've just said. They operate mainly helping people to design really good websites for small businesses, but they're also very heavily into content marketing, and that's how I know them, through the content marketing live events that I've been to in the past. They have just published their first book. Now, you were very kind enough to give me a shout out for my book, Cats, Mats and Marketing Plans, earlier on, Pascal. And Martin and Lindsay have just launched their book literally about a month after mine came out. And it's called The Content Fortress. What a fabulous name for a book. I mean, I thought I'd cornered the marketing cheese with Cats, Mats and Marketing Plans, or at least tried to make it a little bit intriguing. But the Content Fortress is equally intriguing, and effectively what they're saying is, the upshot is that every piece of content that you create is almost like building a brick in a fortress. And the more content you've got, the stronger your proposition becomes. And I just love that sort of imagery and that message that they've built into their book. They were very lucky to get Marcus Sheridan, who's a very famous American content marketer and international speaker, to do the foreword for their book. So that's another reason to have a look at it. But quite honestly, these two are absolutely passionate about what they do. It's a very successful company. They also run a very successful community of people inside Jammy Digital as well. So it was absolutely inevitable that they were going to stick a book out there. And I think it's available in paperback and on Amazon Kindle as well. And you can still pre-order signed copies if you want to go onto their website. And I'll include the link to that in the show notes. But Martin and Lindsay, well done on getting Content Fortress out there into the world.
Oh, that's wonderful news. And well, you know how much respect I have for book authors. So much work goes on behind the scenes before it's out and available. So thanks very much, Roger. I really appreciate that. So today, I would like to bring to your attention the very smart approach to content marketing by a lady called Jenny Ensworth. Now, Jenny is a leadership mindset and motivation consultant. She provides public speaking services, training, one-to-one mentoring, and so on. And it's really looking after individuals and team leaders. And she also coined that label, memorable leadership, looking at ways for you to leave a lasting positive impact in the people that you interact with. So she has a very active LinkedIn profile. If you follow Jenny, you're going to get lots of regular kind of wisdom and things that are going to make you smile. But in terms of her content marketing, you may remember, Roger, I was talking a lot about how much I kind of favor the series format as a way of building your brand. But there's also another tactic, which is quite the opposite of series, which is what I call the star content, where there is one bit of content that helps your website shine and, of course, build your brand accordingly. So very recently, Jenny reissued her Fire Your Life free audio. So this is a half-hour kind of presentation discussion to help you feel re-energized and actually look more positively about things that you're facing, whether in your personal and professional life. And it is one bit of content that's all there is on the website, but that's the star content kind of strategy. So Fire Your Life Up, a free audio that can be downloaded. That also really helps Jenny kind of share her values and wisdom when it comes to leadership and memorable leadership of that. But also there's a smart way to keep it simple but make it very impactful.
Fantastic. Yeah, and of course Jenny was a compere at one of the Upreneur Summits recently as well, so she's well known to quite a lot of the people watching the show.
Excellent. So thank you very much to all our content creators today, and of course for the past few episodes. We look forward to talking about more content creators in 2021. But Roger, once again, one last time in 2020, let's move on to film marketing.
Yes.
So, Roger, in film marketing, since we are fast approaching Christmas, I would like to talk to you about a very special Christmas movie.
Die Hard again?
No, although we did confirm and agree that this was one of the best Christmas movies ever. So I'm going to talk about the second best Christmas movie, although a movie that really makes the top 10 or top 20 or top 50 Christmas films. I want to talk about Gremlins, released in 1984.
Mogwai. Bright light. Yeah, I mean, the memory cheats a bit, doesn't it, Pascal? Because initially, when we agreed to talk about this film, I was struggling to remember it as a Christmas movie. And I think initially it was launched in the States in June 1984. But yes, it was launched in the United Kingdom in December 1984. But of course it's a Christmas movie because it takes place at Christmas and there's lots of Christmas decorations going on and all of that sort of thing. So I think it definitely does qualify as a Christmas movie. But again, it's one of those, it's a great movie. I don't know whether it's a comedy or whether it's a drama. I don't know whether it's a horror film or whether it's a children's movie or an adult's movie. Maybe it just appeals to all age groups, and that's what makes a good Christmas movie.
I would agree. I mean, I think when you look at the critics and, of course, the interviews with the makers, they call it a horror comedy. So maybe a bit of a get out. But I know that when it came to a Christmas movie and the case of Christmas toys, I know that my parents would say to me, you have to look after your toys because, they cost money, it's expensive and so on. But in case of Mogwai, I've never known any Christmas present coming with so many strict instructions.
They wanted you to treat the toy exactly how you would actually have to treat the animal itself, wouldn't you? Don't get it wet, don't feed it after midnight, and whatever the other thing you weren't supposed to do was.
No sunlight.
No sunlight, that's right,
Yeah.
That's right. And the original Mogwai is incredibly cute.
Incredibly.
It's got great big eyes, great big ears, very cute face. It did remind me a bit of a sort of cuter E.T., I think, at the time. But actually, if you think about it, with its ears, pointing out to the side, it's not dissimilar to the Baby Yoda in Mandalorian that we talked about last week.
Indeed, it's funny you should mention that. And maybe that's the rule of cinematography. If you want to make it cute, it must have big ears and big eyes.
Yeah, Dumbo.
Interestingly, I mean, my family, we absolutely adored watching Gremlins because it was one of those where you were laughing at horrible things. I mean, we mentioned a moment about what happens to the poor residents of Kingston Falls, when obviously the Mogwai the Gremlins are released into the town. But we at the time had a cute little dog, a Yorkshire Terrier, and she had those really much bigger ears than normal for Yorkshire Terrier. So because she was a female dog, we called her Gizmy in celebration of Gizmo, which is a name given to Mogwai. For kind of film nerds out there, they'll know that Mogwai is a kind of bastardized version of Mandarin and Cantonese word for demon or little evil spirit.
Mm, mm. And again, those remarkable scenes once they go on the rampage in that town. There's one scene set in a cinema where they're all watching they're all watching a film, and they're eating popcorn and drinking beer. And I think two of them are playing cards, and one gremlin obviously cheats, so the other gremlin shoots him. And then, as you say, genuinely, there's the one scene where the mother is being stalked in the house by two or three of the gremlins, and she kills them all basically one by one in pretty nasty ways. I think she puts one of them in the microwave, and doesn't one of them go down the waste disposal chute and get ground up like that? And that's pretty gruesome, actually. But maybe it's okay when you're doing it to something that isn't really real.
Possibly, but that we're going to talk about marketing in a moment, but the filmmakers got into a bit of bother with critics and particularly reviewers where they believed that this was essentially, like E.T., or was a bit like, other family action movies. And they got caught out into, frankly, a horror story. And the original script written by Chris Columbus, and where Joe Dante actually got involved as a director, was even more like a horror film because particularly Joe Dante had just worked on The Howling, which is a werewolf movie.
Yeah.
And some of the attack from the gremlins and what happens to people were far, far more gruesome. As I'm listening to you, I'm smiling because I'm remembering, of course, one of the most infamous scene is the old neighbor, the lady who basically end up, using her stair lift that, has been interfered with by the gremlins. Yes. And she goes shooting across the window into the backyard.
Yeah, but Pascal, it is a good film, and we will talk about the marketing in a moment. But to my mind, there was also one scene in this film which was utter rubbish. And it's the scene where the two protagonists, Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates, I can't remember what their characters were called, they're talking about a Christmas Eve from her childhood. And I can't remember whether it was an uncle or father had climbed down the chimney to try and surprise them all as Father Christmas. And he got stuck and he died, but they didn't know where he was. And this whole scene was played out in all seriousness. And it just wasn't serious at all, but neither was it funny. And I always remember thinking, what was all that about? And if I'd have been the director, I might have just edited that scene out entirely.
Interestingly, that's actually a symptom of the remnants of the original script, because the original script, again, was far more into a horror genre than kind of horror comedy or dark comedy. And I know that Steven Spielberg, who was the executive producer, wanted that particular dialogue segment out. So did the Warner Brothers and so on. But Joe Dante was keen to retain it. And the reason for that is because the film, as you watch it over and over again, is actually playing back some of the urban legend that people used to. So the case of the gremlin in the microwave was the urban legend of people drying their pets in microwave. This one about people being stuck in the chimney was an urban legend. So he was using the story to play back urban legend, but also play back to us some of the more darker elements of fairy tales. So that the gremlins and what they do and how they behave, if you look at some of the original version of the Grimm brothers mentioned actually a moment ago, they are like that. I mean, Hansel and Gretel, the original story, is truly terrifying. Not this kind of softened up version that we now know.
Oh, of course, and Red Riding Hood gets eaten by the wolf in the original.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned a moment, the reason I watched Gremlins, actually, because there's one scene that I just can't wait, is when they are at the cinema. Yes. And the movie they are watching is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And when the dwarf starts to sing, and then all the gremlins stop messing on and fighting and whatever, and they all start to sing together in unison, it's just pure joy.
Yeah, absolutely right. I'd forgotten about that, but it is one of those moments where, oh, wow. Whoever thought that up, it was just a genius moment.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the film kind of works. But it's also I mean, I can't remember how many times we mentioned Steven Spielberg as part of film marketing, but of course he's such a prolific, a producer as well as director. But very much like the Goonies that we spoke about a few weeks ago, this movie is like the 80s kind of trove of nods and little kind of Easter eggs. There's stuff that you spot now that you may have missed the first time you saw it, back in 84, from cameos from producers and directors, including Steven Spielberg himself. You've got Robbie the Robot from the Planet.
Yes.
You've got, obviously, E.T., that was produced a few years prior to Gremlins, where, in a very symbolic way, I think it's called Spike, isn't it? The evil gremlin, the leader of the pack, is hiding in a big kind of department store behind a stuffed puppet version of E.T. And then that puppet just drops to the floor as he's looking in a very evil way towards the Zach, I think is the actor, that's right, and looking to obviously kill him.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, I love things like that, because if you don't know what it means, it doesn't harm you. But if you're a geek like us, it's just a treasure trove of experience, isn't it? And talking points throughout the movie.
That's why I end up, when I watch those movies, I look at the posters on the wall of the bedrooms, because usually the stuff that either I used to have or wish I'd had. I think the most kind of obvious nod to 80s movies would be when, in one of the scenes, one of the gremlins is playing a video game, which is Star Wars. And when they move towards the cinema, and you've got the neon lights outside telling you coming soon, they have the working titles of famous films by Steven Spielberg, and so on and so forth. But it's not distracting, because one thing that I know you enjoy is the movie really moves at quite some pace.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's fast. It is fast. Apart from that dodgy scene about the chimney, it's just never ending.
So there was one thing I wanted to ask you, Roger. You mentioned a moment ago how odd Gremlins, a fine Christmas movie released in the summer of 1984, we got it properly in December in the UK, but then the movie was re-released a second time at the theatres in the summer of 1985 in the US again. Just like, I've never heard of a movie having two cinema releases in the space of 12 months. Is it because you think the winter months, with all the merchandising and the hype in Europe, led to a bigger fan base?
I think that may have been it, mightn't it? Because, I mean, my initial thought was this was probably before the days when it was absolutely guaranteed that the VHS, I guess at the time, naturally came out 3 to 4 months after the cinema version. You could actually have to wait a year, 2 years, even longer for a film to come out. So I wonder whether it was less about the fact there was a fan base. It was just that they were geeing the market up again, make people come to the cinema to remember how good it was, so that when we get it out onto VHS, they're going to go and buy that as well. So I wonder whether it was almost like a pre-marketing campaign for the actual VHS release.
Of course, yes. And then, like all movies, this has had the treatment on DVD, Blu-ray, and so on. I've got the DVD version, the special director's cut, where there's no additional scenes, but there's documentaries. And actually, in that documentary, I learned something that I wasn't aware of, which is the term gremlins allegedly comes from a British pilot who, during the Second World War, kept blaming the many kind of mechanical failures of their aircraft to creatures called gremlins.
Yeah, well, there you go. I never knew that.
So, shall we talk about marketing just a bit?
Let's talk about marketing.
So, first thing, this was 1984. Not many options available to the filmmakers and to Warner Brothers in particular. So we had posters and we had trailers. To begin with, the poster at the time was fantastic. All you saw was this box held by what we later will understand would be Zach's in our hands. The box is slightly open, the lid is slightly off, and we see two cute little hands peeking out of the box to reveal, obviously, Mogwai, Gizmo, but you had to go to the movies to see what he looked like.
Cute. clever, mischievous, intelligent, dangerous. No, it was an intriguing poster, wasn't it? Not shocking, just definitely intriguing. And again, in those days, because you hadn't got the ability to show a trailer to everybody on the internet, on YouTube, like you would today, posters were a massive, massive way of promoting a film. And I think something like this, with that, it tantalizingly makes you wonder what is in the box. And we just love a little mystery, don't we? I want to open the box and find out what's inside it. So yeah, it's a very, very clever piece of marketing just to whet the customer's appetite.
You're right. The reward was go to the movies and sit for the reveal. And they followed the same kind of intrigue for the trailers, but that backfired. Because you see, when you watch a trailer and it comes across as a cutesy Christmas movie or something that is not a dark comedy or a horror, because for the trailers, they either completely hid from view the Mogwai the Gizmo or the Gremlins, or there was one trailer for families where you only see Gizmo. So, of course, families with very young children went to see Gremlins and got a bit of a shock.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is one of the memories that I have of that film, was that I had quite a few friends who had younger sisters and brothers at the time, and I do remember a lot of the merchandising that went with the film, and again, because as you've said, it was re-released, that merchandise had really taken hold culturally, and it was cute. It was almost like a surrogate baby, wasn't it? It was an inhuman baby in a human sort of way, and it was cute, and it sucked people in. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I bet a lot of young children begged their parents to take them to the cinema to see that, and then their parents probably spent the next year regretting it because they had to sit up with their kids all night comforting them because they thought that the gremlins were going to pop out from under the bed and put them in a liquidizer.
Well, particularly when the character plays the dad at the very end, because from memory, the film is book ended with the dad monologue stating that he has a story to tell, and then the closer where he says, look under your bed, look in your kind of cupboards, they could be there. So I'm sure those poor kids have been spending many nights keeping their parents awake. And interestingly, I mentioned a moment ago, 1984 was an amazing year for film goers because you also had Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and that very infamous scene of the heart being pulled out of the chest of one of the victims in the Temple of Doom. So Steven Spielberg that year got criticized for creating movies that were allegedly for families and became scary, as a result of which he suggested that they should invent the PG-13 kind of category of film rating. So, Gremlins is responsible for creating that new rating.
I didn't know that, Pascal, and I always thought the PG-13 was a bit of a scam. Really, it was to let us show a scary movie, but get away with a lower certificate for it. So, I suppose, if we're thanking Spielberg for that, then there's quite a few films that I guess I saw in that period which I owe to him.
Yeah, so just back to the marketing for me, Roger, is I think with the trailers that was a misstep. That they missed it and misled. It perhaps was innocent. Perhaps he was just informed by the success of the likes of E.T. and films that are just coming out of the early 80s. But I think it's a lesson for everyone out there. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you, of course, about not just the marketing, but the ongoing marketing, is how Gremlins then were adopted in popular culture, and they are known by all and mentioned everywhere. You are more au fait with music than I am, I must confess, but am I right in thinking that near your neck of the wood there is a rock band called Mogwai?
There is a rock band called Mogwai, and until this instant in time, I hadn't actually made the connection. But of course, it's absolutely like slap the forehead moment, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And there are all sorts of other instances and examples of that where Gremlins has effectively been absolutely embedded within popular culture.
Yeah, and also when as the Two Geeks, we say that the 80s were a great decade for film and music. We are right. That's absolutely right. I mean, to the point where even the very last offering from the Lego movie, the Gremlins make an appearance as a little nod to, obviously, what they've given us as legacy to film goers and storytellers.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago when we did Lost Boys, and we said, wouldn't it have been great? I wanted to be the vampire. I wanted to be Kiefer Sutherland's character. Even though the Mogwai was cute and everything, and he was adorable, and he kept getting cuddles from the young kids in the movie, you really wanted to be the stripy one, didn't you? Having fun and shooting people and sitting in the cinema.
Yeah, and eating lots of sweets.
Eating popcorn.
and indeed, people have been trying to, I think, overanalyze the movie, saying, it's a kind of a criticism or an observation of society, how we are now dominated by gadgets and overconsumption. I just think it's just a fantastic dark comedy that then opened the door to things like Critters and Ghoulies and many of the other kind of 80s and 90s nasties.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the best, and yet again is one I'm going to have to dig out from the depths of my cupboard, blow some dust off it probably, and give it another watch.
So to our viewers and listeners, you've heard it here again. Die Hard and Gremlins are the top Christmas movies, and we hope that you get a chance to watch them again.
Yeah, and every time we say something like this, you can just hear the internet start to seize up, can't you? But yeah, absolutely right. We'll be talking about more Christmas movies on future episodes of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast.
Roger Edwards, it has been a pleasure to spend so much of 2020 in your company. This is episode 23, wrapping up for our viewers and listeners. We want to wish you the very best. Enjoy the break. We'll be back very, very soon, early 2021. I was Pascal Fintoni, he was Roger Edwards. Until the very next one, go out there and make sure your marketing is done right. Bye for now.